Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. I'll extend that good morning. I'm taking my glasses off because I'd like to see people. I hope I can remember how to do this. This is the first time I've been back in person talking to people, and let's hope that may continue. Today's morning session, well, it's part of the overall theme, actually, of the conference, the Great Recalibration. It's a great name there. There is no doubt that the market is going through significant change, unprecedented change, I think is the word everyone likes to use, and I think it's probably also worth saying that actually most industries are going through unprecedented change since the pandemic, but it's true to us very much so. In today's opening session, we're looking more generally at the growth of direct-to-consumer, content to consumer, and today you've got myself with this presentation on the rise of studio selling to self, a revolution in content distribution. Shortly after that, I will be inviting Parul from ZTV on the stage. I know he's here, I saw him in coffee, to have a chat with him. I'll then sit down and hand over to John, who'll have a chat with Sky. And then finally, to round off the session, we've got a panel with some great panelists. So if you bear with us before coffee, I'm hoping there'll be a great deal of insight for you all. So moving on to the first presentation, the rise of studio sell to self. I'm not sure that's a great word. We call it lots of different things, kind of the impact of vertical integration on selling of content. Just quickly, my name is Jack Davison. If you don't know me, I'm EVP at 3Vision. We're a content consultancy. The point of difference to our strategy and research work is that we actually have people out in the field doing content work, buying content, selling content, working for services, working for content owners. So hopefully that puts us at the coalface to make sure that the research and the strategy work we do is worth its salt. And I just talk about one research product of ours, not as a plug, although it becomes a plug, but Show Tracker is a syndicated research product that basically tracks where all of the scripted TV series go around key markets in the world. The reason I mention it is because when I start showing you data on the pipeline of studio content, that's where it comes from. We're tracking the data, exactly where it goes, who surfaces it, who premieres it, how they premiere it, and that enables us to sort of cut the data and slice it in different ways and look at fundamentally what we're talking about today. Which is kind of the selling of content to self when the studios withdraw their pipeline from the market and keep it from their services, such as Disney+. So, and the context of this all is undoubtedly the streaming wars. This is by no means an exhaustive diagram of services, but the streaming wars is certainly a legacy of kind of 15 years of SVOD launches. I probably should definitely put AVOD up here and put YouTube back into 2006-07 and all the other services, but nonetheless it shows how there has been a significant rise in the number of services to what is fairly estimated to be well over 1 billion SVOD subscribers around the world today. In the main, the studios came in pretty late. I think aside from Hulu, kind of the other businesses were relatively small early on. The likes of HBO Nordic was then kind of the HBO extension of what they were doing in pay TV there at the time. But as well as the studios coming in, the content owners are coming, just again, a smattering of the different content owners going direct. Again, relatively late to the game, but they have been around for some time now. And then you get to an even broader set, if that links there, of pay TV operators, telcos, broadcast channels, all launching services. And I've probably missed a few, but if you keep going, there's not many black shaded ones out left that you can really truly call independent. There are some, but it is a comparatively smaller number. And all of them face a significant amount of competition. There are very usual ways to compete. I'm sure we've got some product owners in here or some proposition people, whether it be price, packaging, content offer, kind of brand, how it may be bundled. But now there are lots of other factors that are contributing to the market being incredibly competitive, not just the number of people, but now, sadly, the kind of the cost of living crisis, the other macro effects, kind of supply chain problems, and the change in investor sentiment that I'll come back to. But the change of investor sentiment, maybe not entirely actually, but significantly suffering from the fact that the poster child of SVOD has finally let the world down. After 46 quarters of consecutive growth in global markets, they finally had a negative global quarter. They did have a couple of negative quarters in the US before then, but not globally. And it's got investors scared. Are they the bellwether for the industry, the canary in the coal mine? And it has had a significant impact on people's attitudes towards SVOD. If you do break that down, it is interesting. I mean, if you take out the 700,000 they lost overnight in Russia, it does go positive. But they did have two regions who had negative quarters, and it is a pretty significant moment. And Wall Street has had its say. This is the first drop in their Q4 releases when they gave some weak guidance, and then their Q1 release, you can see pretty much fell off a cliff, the share price. And they are actually, in context, not alone if you look at other tech and media stocks. And it is going to be a very interesting time to see what happens now with specifically the topic I'm going to go into today about studios pipelining their own content to their own services, but also more generally about the SVOD sector. We've had years and years and years of relentless targeting subscriber growth. Now, profitability matters. You just have to look at all the quarterly transcripts, all the meetings, and see the pressure that's on them. They now have to focus on profitability, and we'll see whether that translates to what they do with content and what they do with their direct-to-consumer services. And this all comes after, to be frank, after the studios have already pivoted, most of them. They have always found ways to work in multiple markets. The studios have always found ways to window, to do things differently, to have their own pay TV channels. It's not the first time they've been doing direct-to-consumer. They moved into pay TV channels kind of in the 80s as the multi-channel market exploded, and now they've moved into SVOD. They have been subtly continuing to do things in the distribution market with third parties, but we've also seen significant selling to self and significant D2C activity. If you, at the start, look at the overall numbers and metrics of selling to self, what this shows you is, if you look on the column graph on the right here, over the last 5 years in terms of the premieres of scripted TV shows that studios that have been aired from the studios in 9 global markets listed here on the left, you can see how many of those premieres actually were on their own services. So they sold that content to self. So in the last 2 years, that's hit 60%, with a huge jump from 2020, when there's a big significant hiccup here from when Disney launched Star, and they started pipelining a lot of the Hulu shows, ABC shows, FX shows into D2C. But they're not alone, and we'll break that down because it is, as an aggregate number, it's a good indicator, but it's much more important when you start looking at things individually. And by country, you can see how that's grown in most markets, but there is, and we'll go to that in a little bit more detail, there is significant variation there as well in terms of how that happens. But as I said, kind of it's better if we look at things individually. Disney actually didn't disappoint Wall Street too much. They did have reasonably good results, probably thankfully for some. They remain very single-minded in terms of what they're doing. They are selling content here and there, but generally, if you look at their data on an aggregate level on the left, in these 10 markets now, we've added another market to the data, you can see how their selling to self has shot up. They have effectively decimated their distribution business in terms of the programming they sell. They have put everything into Disney. There are snippets, and you'll see, and we'll come back to how that might change and how they might do different things. But to get Disney Plus off the ground, and let's see how much they do it to sustain it, they pretty much pushed everything in. You can see there's a few subtle variations across the markets, but not much. If you take HBO, Again, reasonably good results in the quarter. Obviously, a much more fragmented rollout, if that's the right word, or staggered rollout in terms of what they're doing. They've launched in some key markets, but they've got a lot more to go. And if you look at their data reflects exactly that, as you would expect. So where they have launched, in Sweden, Spain, LATAM, they are pretty much all in pushing their content into HBO Max. And overall, their numbers are growing, but they are ultimately held back by their launch strategy, their launch plan, but that is ultimately held back by the fact that they have a lot of pre-existing deals in the market. So if you're in the UK, it's keep flowing through to Sky until 2025. That's the same true for Germany and for Italy for Sky markets. There's OCS deals still in place. There's a kind of OSN Middle East in place. There's lots more deals in place, and that's what's holding them back. So here you can see, in terms of where their shows have gone, the blue are the shows they've sold to self. The yellow are effectively volume deals that are in place with people like Sky that hold them back from doing what they can do. Moving on to Paramount. Paramount are a bit of a mixed bag when you start analysing them, because they've effectively got more levers to play with. They've got their AVOD service, which disrupt the data. They've got their AVOD service, Pluto. They've got Paramount Plus, which is only launched in certain markets. They've got their JV venture with NBC Universal, which is launched, Sky Showtime, which is launching in European markets where Sky aren't present. So when you start breaking down the data, it does look slightly different. And you can see there's a mixed bag. I mean, as well as the fact they had pre-existing services that were that part of their regional businesses. But you can see where Paramount Plus is launched in Mexico, has launched effectively through a rebrand in Australia, has launched in Sweden, although they've backtracked in Sweden, and that will be that will be changing as well. You can see where they've been pipelining content, and in fact, Paramount, I feel. I was going to say the word honest, that's not the right word, have been were a little bit more transparent early on about what they were doing with content, and talking about, very early on, talking about the fact they'd be looking for windowing content, doing co-exclusivity, still doing other deals, shorter windows. They were quite vocal about it and did do that. But then kind of you noticed the language changed for a while when kind of investors were pushing them more to be talking about direct to consumer. But now will we see a return to a slightly more pragmatic approach to things? But what's interesting about Paramount, which is why I have them in here, is they break up their market. It's an interesting way to look at their content by portfolio. So the UK is just about to launch. It hasn't launched, but this is their 21 kind of 22 release schedule. You can see, apart from some legacy deals with Sky, the Paramount Plus content, the Showtime content is going to start coming through Paramount Plus in the UK. You can also see that the Paramount Plus originals are going to start coming through Paramount Plus. But what's to be determined, and if you listen to them and if you see what they've done in other markets, is their programming that comes from CBS in the States, so more of their procedural programming, like the shows up here, like CSI, may well be finding its home more to free TV in the market and be sold to third parties. They may not always get sold, because it's not always easy to sell a US procedural in the markets, but they may well look for a free TV sale. And so we may see a split of their portfolios between Showtime and Paramount Plus originals and CBS content. And it'll be interesting to see if others start following that with their some obvious splits sometimes in content that may not quite fit the proposition of their D2C studio brand. Just quickly running through the last few, kind of NBCU, very mixed bag, obviously a very mixed bag supporting their kind of strategic requirement to support their pay TV businesses, Sky in Europe, Comcast in the US. But you can see they've generally been pipelining through to the Sky business in the UK and through to some of their legacy channel businesses in other markets. I think it's obvious that Peacock is a different proposition to the other studio SVOD services. It was never really going to be a service that was going to launch everywhere around the world, and nobody expected those multiple kind of international launches, and subject to for all of this, subject to any more nuclear consolidation of these businesses, we would expect this mixed approach to continue with NBCU. And then finally, finally for the ones with direct to consumers, is Lionsgate. Obviously, they have Starz Play. As you can see, if you look at their Starz content, the content that's commissioned by Starz in the US and where that goes outside of the US, they have been pushing it all the way through to Starz, where it's launched in global markets. It has a very small presence in Sweden, Starz, as within Viaplay, so that's reflected there. But obviously, I guess big Starz is a big target for acquisition this year. I think everyone will be surprised if they're not bought by someone. So we'll see how that will change that numbers. And last, just to make the illustrative point of comparison, the one and only true studio arms dealer left in the market, Sony, is still filling their boots and selling to all the third parties in all of the markets, except in India, where they still have the Sony Live business, and there'll be a few instances where they've got their legacy pay TV channel businesses. So they'll pop up like AXN in Spain. So when you look at that all together, you can see overall the fact that kind of it's of all of the big ones, Disney are all in, very much fully pushing their content through the pipelines. Lionsgate through Starz exactly the same, and the others are slightly more nuanced in the fact that they have varies by regions, they have by where they've launched, by what their interests are in those markets, and what the deals that they have are. But perhaps one of the interesting things that kind of we could speculate on is if you look back at the regions, you can keep cutting this data. You can obviously cut it by studio, by market. This pretty much reflects kind of where everyone's launched and how much the studio premieres are in each market. So this number will change radically when I run the numbers next month, because Disney have now launched in South Africa, so they do have a service there pipelining it. And obviously there are kind of big variations. But the interesting question is that with this new lens that investors are looking at studios, and with the new pressures on profitability, we hear plenty of people talk about that being very important focus. Zaslav talked about it in the Warner Discovery session, talk about how they will look at what they do with content, and he's not alone. Will that impact how much content they sell to third parties? And if so, is that going to be split by a portfolio? Is that going to be split by a window? Or will maybe they change their rollout plans? There's no indication yet they are, but that change in rollout plans might actually be a bit more subtle than just saying, actually, we're not going to launch in this market because we've got a great paying customer who's got a volume output deal and he's going to pay us $150 million for a 5-year deal. It may be, actually, we can launch there, but we can't afford to not risk going in with a big partnership deal, maybe, with a bundled proposition, with an operator that's going to give us X million wholesale subs. So there are various different ways that they could look at it, and that could well be something to explore over the year as these pressures start to bite on the studios. So just wrapping up, obviously there is no great slowdown in studios going direct to consumer, and in terms of what they're doing, they're still pipelining content through to their services. It's increasing as they're launching in new markets. HBO Max in the Netherlands, Disney in South Africa, and now we're just about to have Paramount in the UK, which is an interesting one in itself, as that Paramount Plus is, if you've got Sky Cinema in the UK, you will get Paramount Plus for free. So that's an example of Paramount playing in lots of different ways and how they do it. But will that focus of profitability change things? Before all of this, we were already looking at how these windowing paradigms were changing. We know from talking to the studios, there's lots of short-term deals going on. There's this dreadful term, pulsing of content on services. We know you see some Disney did some deals for some pretty decent movies, not brand new movies, but shows like kind of Deadpool 2, things like that, on Freevee, on Amazon's AVOD service in the UK, Freevee. They're going to be on there. Universal has done an exclusive deal for some content on Freevee. So you'll see different things happening, and perhaps we will see more now this new lens is put on everybody. That's it for my slides. I can take questions if there are questions, but I then will be moving on to our fireside chat with Parul. I'm not sure if there is. No. That's Parul for our fireside chat. But this is my guest for the fireside chat, not for questions, unless Paul has questions, but he's welcome to ask ones now as well. But if that's it, then we'll move on. I'll get Paul over to see. Oh, sorry, John. Yes.
Just one very quick one, Jack. So what is your gut instinct in terms of this new drive for profitability and what it means for whether you sell to yourself or to third parties? Do you think there'll be some relaxing now and more content made available for third parties?
I think there will be some clearer understanding and clearer activity when it comes to windowing, is what I think will happen. I think you will still see them prioritising their services. I think they'll still pipeline it through, but it's all a question of really of also timing of markets, timing of the product, how much support they need. So why not in some markets sell Mandalorian to free TV or put it on an AVOD? Why not? If that asset has been sweated quite a bit in the market, it may make sense to do. I think I picked probably the wrong example. Disney Plus are the one who really are kind of fully invested in the whole thing. I think they whilst we know they will look at windowing, I think maybe the others might be a little bit more on it. But there are deals happening. I saw RTL did the deal with Warner Media for all the HBO Max originals, and that's a long-term deal. I know we'll have to see whether that was partly a preparation for their 2025 end of deal with Sky and a renegotiation tactic. I don't know, but yeah, I think it will be the windowing rather than withdrawal of activity that will start happening.
What's your instinct about going all in as Disney and HBO Max have, or doing a broader distribution approach like Paramount Plus? It seems like going all in, isn't that undervaluing the content in the long run?
I'm not sure. I don't think anyone could have done it other than Disney. I don't think anyone was big enough, had broad enough kind of shoulders. I don't think the Sky Showtime venture between NBCU and Paramount is a reflection of that. They knew that in Europe and in Sky, they weren't big enough to go alone, so they had to do it together. And even then, it's nuanced because it's together with pay TV in most of those markets. So I think kind of Disney were the only one who could really do it. I think HBO, there's a roller coaster of sort of bravado, hasn't there, been with HBO from when they started, where they were talking in a little bit more cautious terms, and then Jason Kilar comes in and says, "No, we've got to fucking do it everywhere," and then he's obviously out now. Zaslav's in, being a bit more cautious, so we'll see. But they're not a slam dunk proposition, so it's not easy for them on their own. But now now Discovery are going to become a tab on the service. Then kind of that changes things a bit, and Discovery is quite a different beast in different markets. So you can't. And I guess even with Disney, this isn't totally true, but with the others, there is absolutely nowhere near a global blueprint for what they can do. There's nowhere near. So what does that mean for going all in on kind of global DC? You have to do things differently in every region and in every market. So yeah.